Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Latter-day Bridge Builders. I'm Juliet. I'm inactive. Mitch is an atheist and ex-Mormon, and he's not here. And Ashton is hyperactive in the church, and he is also not here. I am so excited to have Linda Hamilton with me today. We have her book, The Flowers, the Whole Relief Society, Get Up, ready to go. But super excited for this little girl talk we're about to have. We're going to focus on polygamy. And I know everyone's favorite topic. No one's ever got feelings about that, do they?
No. I could talk about this for days.
I know, and we only have an hour, but we're gonna get as much as we can in an hour. A little intro to Linda. She has a bachelor's in history from BYU, currently doing her master's in history at Sam Houston State University, which, if you're familiar with Ben Park, he is actually her advisor, and you should be. If you're not, watch the episode we did with him about a month ago. Her thesis is focused on women, polygamy, and identity. And her first book, The Fourth Wife, came out, how long ago did it come out? This last spring, in like April?
Yeah, it came out in April.
Came out in April. It is a gothic horror about Mormon polygamists living in a haunted house. So I feel like that ticks a whole lot of boxes. You've got like the horror, the religion, all this stuff. One thing that really impresses me about Linda is that I feel like she has thought about and talked about polygamy in a way that is just really thorough and really thoughtful and really honest. And so I'm excited to have you. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
It sounds weird that I love to talk about polygamy because obviously I don't love the concept of polygamy, but I feel very, very passionate about this topic as, you know, a Mormon woman and as I think just a feminist and a woman in general. Like, this is a really important topic that we need to reckon with. There is generational trauma sitting within us. And I think that talking about polygamy honestly and openly is one of the only ways we're going to really start to get at that. And so that was one of my goals for writing my book, The Fourth Wife, is it's a fictional book, but it is heavily based in historical research because I am a historian as well. And so I just really wanted to give women a voice and show, like, here's some reality around polygamy. And I turned it into a horror because horror is an excellent genre for analyzing the things that we don't want to talk about, right? As a society, as a community, like, we don't want to talk about polygamy, but we need to talk about it because there is a real horror underlying it that is still coming through to us, to our daughters, to our children.
Yeah. And it's almost like every time we have a new generation of daughters or a new generation of children, there's like I want to say a re-horror. That's not correct, but that is it, you know, as people reckon with it, it continues to be horrifying.
And 100%. And that's, like I said, that's that generational wound that we haven't solved it, right? We haven't fixed it, and it will not. My hope is that we would get to a point where the new generations are not being re-traumatized by it because it's something that we've been
talked about.
We've talked about,
reckoned with.
But it's going to take a lot of work.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, let's kind of just like jump into where maybe some of this like trauma is rooted for you. So imagine 14-year-old Linda. Do you remember like this kind of time? So I'm thinking like what was your understanding of polygamy like coming up in the LDS church?
So I thought about this a lot, and I don't really have a memory of not really knowing what polygamy was, or that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy. I know that is a huge shocker for a lot of people, especially when the church finally officially said that around 2012, like, hey, Joseph Smith did practice polygamy, and that shocked a lot of people. But I think that I owe that to my father, who is a huge church history nerd, and he's kind of the one who got me started on really enjoying delving into church history. And so I never really had a time that I can like think of that I wasn't at least aware of polygamy and its existence. But I was a very anxious, perfectionist child. And the church for me was very black and white. And I internalized everything. Whatever my leaders told me, whatever my parents told me, whatever the church, prophets, all these people, whatever they told me was truth. So my honest feelings that I remember about polygamy growing up were, well, I guess that's just how it is. Okay. And I do remember being told as a child, things like, well, polygamy probably exists in heaven and you're going to have to live it. But don't worry because, right, you'll be perfected. And so you won't have jealousies. It'll be perfect and you'll love it. And again, it was that like, okay, I guess that like if that's how it's going to be.
Yeah. And then if I can interrupt you real quick, did you feel then like the message that you got that if you had any discomfort with any of these things, that the problem lied squarely with you?
Oh, 100% for all things with church. That was my life for 30 years, right? Like if there's something feels uncomfortable, it's a problem with me. And so I think that I probably did have emotional reactions to polygamy and being told that as a kid in a primary class. But I've clearly buried it because I was like, no, whatever this lovely brother who's 70 years old teaching us 7-year-old kids says must be the gospel truth, He
He
That's
says
how
it.
Programmed.
Yeah, he says it. I think when I joined the church at 16, I knew about polygamy. I knew that Joseph Smith specifically practiced polygamy. And I've been surprised to hear in the deconstruction community how many people, it seems like, find that out late. Like even people going on their missions and people will mention Joseph Smith practicing polygamy and they're like, stupidest thing I ever heard, I've been fascinating to hear. I think that I realize that my assumption has been that everybody understands things and specifically church history the same way I do. Definitely not the case. There's so much variance in that.
Absolutely. That is something I've run into too. I'm like, wait, you guys
you didn't
know all the, I actually have memories of quizzing the missionaries when they would come over for dinner when I was 8 years old on church history. Because I don't know, I grew up on American Girl and I was always a history nerd. So church history sort of just went hand in hand with that. And I remember being amazed that they
what the
didn't
things they
know
didn't
a lot
know.
of things.
Yeah. And I feel like just when there's so much that we don't bring up. And so our assumption is that everyone around us, we kind of fill in the holes with just kind of assuming that everyone is sort of in the same place as we are, as far as whatever our understanding is of what everything historically.
And there is a lot of reasons why the church didn't openly talk about Joseph Smith practicing polygamy. And I would highly recommend Dr. Benjamin Park's book, American Zion, if you haven't read that, because it does such a good job of breaking down this change that happened in the early 20th century as the church is really moving away from polygamy and trying to do everything they can to basically make it seem like they never did it, or they've always been this all-American monogamous group, which is not true. And so I think the church did a disservice to itself and its members in that dedication to this idea of we're this American ideal, anti-communist, families.
Yeah.
And it came back to bit them.
Yeah, it sounds like that kind of is was part of the beginning of the inability to reckon with it.
Yes.
Right. Because
right. If no one tells you, how are you going to really deal with it?
Yeah. Are you a descendant of polygamy?
I am. So my dad was a convert. So no polygamy on that side. But on my mom's side, there is polygamy. And that was another one of those things where I was aware that I had polygamous ancestors, but I don't really remember talking about them very much, but I became very fascinated with them when I wanted to do research for The Fourth Wife. And they were the inspiration that I would say the jumping off point for The Fourth Wife, because when I was doing research, I discovered oh, this man was married to biological sisters. And that is something that is actually very common in polygamy in the 19th century is sister pairs and also mother-daughter pairs. And there was a belief amongst the men, of course, that sisters would get along better naturally because they were used to sharing things. They were used to being together and all those things. And there's not a ton of specific historical research that I've seen being done on sororal polygamy, which is like sister polygamy. Although I do know a fellow grad student of mine who is starting to work on that, and I'm really excited for her work on it. And you do have a spectrum, right? You have sisters who actually, it seems like they chose to be together. Like they're like, well, if I'm going to be a sister wife, I guess I might as well be it with my sister. But there's also a dark side to that. And this book explores that. Like, I just feel like humans have always been humans. And one of the things I run into as a historian is that a lot of people like have a lot of assumptions that that people in the past were so different or so primitive. And people have always existed. We've always been the way we've been. And so even though situations and contexts change and maybe popular beliefs change, I find it impossible that there were not a large amount of jealous sister wives.
Yeah.
Like how could you, right? Like your sister is married to your husband.
Right.
Like
the
jealousy abounds.
The person that you were fighting over toys with becomes the person that you are sharing a spouse with.
Right.
Yeah. It goes deep.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So mentioning the sister pairs, the mother-daughter pairs, as you have learned more about maybe like the details of polygamy, like can you share maybe some of the elements that maybe felt more surprising to you, or things that have made you that have been the most difficult to reckon with?
So I was never really under like any delusion that polygamy was this like beautiful, harmonious thing, although I have met some Mormons who really do believe that. And I'm so sorry to tell you that that's not really historically accurate for the vast majority of these families.
But what about,
But I found a lot of deep things I found a lot of things that really did like cut me, about, even though I wasn't going in with like super rosy picture, there was still plenty of things that shocked me.
Yeah.
Is what I'm saying. And so one of the big things was poverty. I don't think we really ever talk about that. No one ever mentioned that to me. The idea that most of these women were living in abject poverty or they were supporting themselves and their children.
Yeah.
Because you have one man who's splitting his already very limited 19th century
on the frontier,
American frontier resources with multiple women and children. It's just not going to spread that well.
Right.
And add to that, another very interesting thing that I discovered was that most of these polygamous families did not live together. This like image of like all of them living in like a house together, I think sort of comes from Brigham Young and like the Beehive House. But that's not how the majority of them lived. Many of them lived very separate, sometimes cities or states away from each other. And so there were women who saw their husband like once a year.
Yeah.
He'd like show up in Idaho, get you pregnant, and then leave again. And who's going to take care of you?
Yeah.
Maybe he can send a little bit of money, but that is one of the really hard things I found to reckon with, is for a church that tries to promote itself as being so pro-family, so pro-specific gender roles.
Yeah.
Those gender roles go out the window
Yeah.
in polygamy. Most of these women are having to scrape by just to feed their children. And that is not very rosy to me.
Yeah.
That is not something that paints like, yes, God wants this. Everyone to be living in poverty, everyone to be struggling, for you to never see your husband because he's always off with his favorite. That, favorites exist, jealousies exist, hierarchies also existed within polygamy, which I found really interesting. Typically, the first wife is the wife that would be like kind of in charge of all the other wives. She would be the one who you would have to appeal to for resources and for, access to time and money and all these different things. But sometimes it was also the wife that had the most children could become the highest one in the in the hierarchy, or just sometimes they had a flat out favorite, and that one sort of just became the top dog.
Yeah.
But again, these are all things that are not breeding family love and like these great familial networks that we seem to think should exist in Mormonism.
Yeah. If I can bring up the apologetic that we often hear, that like apologetic, that polygamy existed for the women because otherwise they wouldn't be provided for, and that it was giving women and children security and resources, when it sounds like that is the opposite.
Sorry, I have very strong reactions to that one because I too grew up believing that and hearing that it was for the widows.
Yeah.
They were only marrying the widows. No, they were not only marrying the widows. These women were not without the ability to get partners. Because a lot of people say, well, like, oh, so many men were killed on the trip west or in Hans Mill and all stuff. I'm like, yes, men were killed that way. So were women.
Yeah, people died.
But there was not an insane ratio that was off.
It wasn't 7-1.
Yeah.
Or 40-1
Yes.
if you're the prophet.
I think the biggest proof of that is that as polygamy goes on over these decades, they start marrying younger and younger girls because there are less of them. You have one man taking up all of
Dig
these
deeper
women.
to get to start scraping
Yes.
to get your women.
And you see that in the FLDS. That was a really huge issue. They had, unfortunately, like their organization actually like kicked out a whole bunch of young boys. Just seriously just dropped them off and kicked them out.
They call them the Lost Boys, right?
Yep, the Lost Boys, just so that competition for women. Like the population is always naturally going to be around 50-50. And so this idea that there were so many women that needed protection is not true. The idea that these men needed to give all these had resources and take care of them. Most of them, again, these women were independent women providing for themselves the majority of the time. So these are just I think these are just ways that we want to make ourselves feel better about it, right? There's so much of that. Like, it's scary. It's so scary. I totally get it, having been there myself, to look at things that make you realize like, oh, this was a patriarchal system set up by men for men that abused women and children by turning them into objects to be collected, to be used, to be bred in order to build their status both here on earth and in heaven. Because I think that's also a really big part that we kind of miss. Because sometimes when we're talking about polygamy, we focus a lot on earthly life and on this concept of like, well, maybe it was for the widows, or, they just really needed to raise up seed and have a lot of children, which is also something that's been debunked as well. And I think we forget that this is actually baked into Mormon theology. It still exists today in the Latter-day Saint temple. If you've gone through the Latter-day Saint temple, you have participated in a polygamous ordinance. Polygamy is still baked into this, especially if you've been sealed. And
we so recently, we know like the current president of the church and President Nelson, the most recent one who's just passed away, both are sealed to multiple women. And that Dallin H. Oaks referenced multiple wives, right?
yes,
I mean, within the last few
his
months.
Heavenly Mothers.
Quite publicly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The famous Heavenly Mothers talk. I wrote a whole, on the Exponent 2 blog, I actually wrote a whole post responding to that if you are if you're interested in my deep dive thoughts on the concept of Heavenly Mothers. But the Mormon cosmos is set up around polygamy. And that still exists today. So in the 19th century, they are living out polygamy on earth in the best way that they can, or they know how, or however they think they should do it. But the reality, and I think this is the most insidious part of it, is that they are really building for the next life in which these men are going to literally become gods, be gods over their wives. Their wives are going to be priests, are going to be priestesses and queens unto them, not unto God, right? We get that MLM, right? God, and then this
the
man's
downline,
God, right?
God.
But all of
Yeah.
these women and children go under him. Within the temple, it's setting it up so that women worship their husbands. They make their covenants unto their husbands and worship their husbands as their God. And so this theological framework haunts us. And I think that a lot of us maybe don't want to see it, or they change some words in the temple so it's different or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's not.
That's not really what we believed. Yeah, that's
No,
not
but
really
it
how
is.
was. Yeah.
There has until the prophet stands up and says directly, heaven is not like this. Heaven is not polygamous.
Yeah.
There are no heavenly mothers. We are going to completely change the temple so that this hidden polygamy and this idea of worshiping your husband as your God is completely gone. Until that happens, it's still open there. It's still out there. And you may personally say, that's not what I believe heaven is. And that's fine. That's your right. You can totally believe that. But the Mormon church is telling you who they are. They are a polygamist sect that now disavows polygamy on earth, but has never rooted it out of their doctrine and out of their cosmos. And until that happens, it is always a question mark, and it is always going to be there haunting us.
Yeah. And do you think that people sometimes, as people are reckoning with this, and trying to make it make sense or make it seem okay, I hope this makes sense, if people sometimes almost like look for ways that polygamy is present, like for example in the temple, like, or in someplace else, as a way of saying like, oh, this thing is okay, this thing like is right, like this thing is of God, to kind of, I'm not sure that actually makes sense. Like I'm just like thinking about how people, because it doesn't feel right to a lot of people, right? A lot of people. And so I'm just thinking that maybe like in an effort to, as far as like polygamy being kind of ever present, that perhaps people in an effort to reconcile it will like allow polygamy to kind of, and the rightness of polygamy to kind of like fill in the gaps, to like fill in the spaces, to make it feel a little bit more reconcilable.
I do think that. I mean, I think that we as humans are going to do a lot. We're going to do a lot of things. We're going to do a lot of cartwheels in order to keep us out of that really scary cognitive dissonance zone, especially when we've been raised in a high demand religion that is very black and white. Everything is all in or all out. And so these gray spaces that the church doesn't want to address directly are very scary. And so I don't feel any judgment or ill will towards I've been there too. I still do that. Like we all do. It's hard to sit in these spaces. And so what happens is we can come up with, we can just say, well, this is of God and I don't know all things. And so therefore I'm just going to deal with it, or I'll figure it out in the next life, or it's just going to be fine. And I think as a coping mechanism that works, but all that does is kick the can down the road. So like we said at the beginning, now we're just setting up our next generation to be re-traumatized by something that we haven't resolved. The amazing author John Green has a book called Everything is Tuberculosis, where he takes, basically any random thing and he ties it back to here's how it ties into tuberculosis. Even like the invention of the cowboy hat is tied back to tuberculosis. And it's a wonderful book. And after I read that book, I decided like if I was going to make my own version of this, it would be everything is polygamy. Because everything in the church ties back to polygamy. I very strongly believe that. And I think one of the biggest things that ties back to polygamy is priesthood authority. And so polygamy really, unfortunately, becomes the foundation of priesthood authority for modern day prophets and apostles. I don't think it has to be that way, but I think they've built the house of cards that way.
Yeah.
And so as everyday members, you do actually kind of have to affirm polygamy, because if you don't affirm polygamy as from God, then you are not affirming the authority,
the correctness
of the current prophet. Because, right, like if Joseph Smith just made up polygamy and it wasn't from God And then he passed it on to Brigham Young, who then expanded it significantly, right? We have generations of prophets that are not doing God's will.
Yeah.
And so why isn't God stopping them? And so that it just raises all of these different questions.
Yeah.
And I think that's because the church has worked so hard on compounding this idea of authority and hierarchy and obedience. And I think that if the church were more willing to let its members sit in gray spaces and allow its members to be, I mean, for lack of a better word, disobedient and not so authoritarian towards them, I don't think polygamy would be as big of a deal. But because, as you said, it's just so directly tied up.
Yeah.
Everything is polygamy. And so you have to, even if you don't think you are doing it, you need to affirm polygamy.
Yeah. So two things. One is, I think that's so interesting what you just pointed out, that we have this like metaphor of like putting things on the shelf, right? And I think a lot of people kind of sometimes like the active, like the faithful perspective is if you have an issue, you just kind of like put it on the shelf up there and maybe you'll get to it or maybe you never will, but you can just kind of wait, and that you can just wait until the next life to get this figured out. The problem is that when you die, when you go 6 feet under, someone is going to have to clean out your house and deal with all of the stuff that you didn't take responsibility for, like while you were living. And so just like this metaphor of like this shelf that has all this stuff on it becomes somebody else's, like because like the generational trauma. Like if you don't deal with the shelf, it often is passed on. I need to write that metaphor up. I feel like that is
one. So true. Because I think that, especially, when our children come to us and ask about polygamy, because they are going to inevitably run up against it. We live in the internet age. They are going to know about polygamy. And some of them, maybe that won't faze them, but other ones might have questions. And if we just say, well, God will work it out in the next life. Okay. I mean, that may promote faith, but does that promote healing? Does that promote us really as a people becoming better, healing like this generational trauma? I think people don't realize that polygamy, aside from like temple ordinances and those kind of things, and like the bigger cosmos and all those things, polygamy still affects us in everyday ways in our culture. Women are routinely objectified and treated as prizes for good men, right? Have you ever heard someone say like, oh, you must have been really valiant on your mission because you got a hot wife, right? Yeah. That's objectifying a woman into a prize that you deserve. And that is exactly what polygamy did. I think a lot of the built-in sexism within the structure of the church, where women can't hold authority over any man, I believe that also comes from polygamy. This is a descendant of polygamy, right? Because if as Brigham Young created and all these things, if a man is eventually going to be your God, you can't have authority over him here on the earth. I think that there are just a lot of these little things. The idea of like worshiping fertility of women while actually completely discounting the women themselves is another huge issue. Yeah. We put so much emphasis on multiplying and replenishing the earth with zero understanding of how women's bodies work, how women's choices work.
Minimal practical support.
Yes, like all of these things. And the idea that like women are just so much better. They're just like these angels who just like pull themselves up by their own bootstraps and like grit their teeth and get through it and do hard things. And those are great compliments, but also what they really mean is be quiet and do what we told you to do.
Yeah, it's I call it the down payment of praise. Mm-hmm. I was watching a cookie business video one time, and this woman, she was talking about with like if you have like a small in-home bakery, like ways to capitalize, to make as much money as possible. And one thing she said is don't worry about like giving friends or family like things for free or at like super steep discounts. And I thought her point was kind of interesting, but what she was saying is that you're probably like expecting that they're going to be really grateful and really thankful and tell you that you did like a really good job and give you this big payout in like the praise. And you know, it's like it's so beautiful. Oh my gosh, and you gave it to me for free and like you're so wonderful. And she was like, just get the payout in money instead. Like don't like just get the payout in something that you can turn around and use. And I like immediately made this connection of what I now call the down payment of praise from maybe the men, maybe the system, to women, to constantly have this stream of, you're good. We love you. You're better than us. God loves you. You don't need the priesthood. So that it's like we are being paid, like things are being made equal through lip service to keep us from coming to collect.
Yes. And I always say that if women were truly equal, you wouldn't need to tell us.
You wouldn't say anything.
We would not have to have talk after talk about how women are so special and amazing, and you really do secretly have the priesthood, but not really.
Because could you ever imagine a male or a female leader in general conference going up, looking at the men and saying, brothers, how blessed I am to gather with you on this tender occasion and see your beautiful faces. You truly carry the image of Christ. That would never happen.
Send me to like a trigger, like
that would never happen. Because we know that we think they're smart. We know that we think that they're capable. We know that we think they should be leaders. Like they don't need to be told that because they get paid in power.
And one of the hardest things is that, and again, I'm not blaming women, I am blaming the system here, is that as women, we are trained to believe that praise equals equality and that praise is all we really need. And it just breaks my heart when I try to have honest conversations about structural power and, you know, these concepts within the church. And they're like, well, my husband always says thank you. My bishop always praises the women. And I'm like, those are great traits, but that is not structural equality.
Yeah.
And again, everything is polygamy because structural inequality is polygamy. That is what it is. It is a man and then the women. As you know, Carolyn Pearson says, right? In polygamy, you need 5 women to equal 1 man, right? You know, 5 women equal 1 nickel.
Yeah. And
it is inherently unequal and it can never be equal.
Yeah. Which, by the way, may she rest in peace.
I know.
Just barely.
I saw that and I was like trying not to cry while driving down here. I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Her book. So I'll just to say, you know, I think her book, The Ghost of Eternal Polygamy, if you have not read that, is one of the greatest contributions to modern day Mormon thought. And that book will open your eyes. Even if you are like, I don't think polygamy is that big of a deal. I don't think it's haunting us now. Like, you're exaggerating. Read that book. The way sealings are structured now, even if you just focus on the concept of widows and remarrying, polygamy is 100% alive and well and directly harming women and children.
Yeah. I have a thought about something early polygamy that I want your take on. And so I feel like often the thing that kind of breaks the shelf for people when it comes to polygamy, the detail that they just can't support, is learning about the fact that Joseph was sealed to women who were already married to other men. And it seems like that is often the thing where people are like, whoa, like that's too much. Like 14 years old, you know, nah, whatever. Sister mother pairs, doesn't matter. You know that like meme? Yeah. And then like what's the other one? Like sister pairs, oh well. But then it gets to women who were married to other men, and it's like, you better be joking. Like, that's where it stops. And I've always wondered, is that because we value the possession, like the other man's possession of that woman more? Like the reason that's like so upsetting to people is because people are bothered that another man has had his wife taken away, when they are not so bothered by women just having their autonomy taken away. Does that make sense?
I do think that is a big part of it. And I think that's put so perfectly, right? Like this idea of like, now Joseph Smith is encroaching on someone else's property.
Right.
And I think also just in general, it feels icky, right?
Yeah.
It feels weird. Like
Because,
some of these women were already straight up pregnant.
right. Because the idea of like they needed a husband, like, well, their husband was there, or their husband was there, and then and happens to not be there right now, and now she's available.
Early polygamy is so messy. Because a big part of it is, right, is Joseph's trying to keep this secret. He doesn't want his wife to know that he is secretly married to dozens of women, including several who are sitting right there next to her every week in Relief Society.
And wasn't she like tasked? Like, wasn't the Relief Society like tasked with like maintaining the moral purity
Yes.
of Nauvoo?
Yeah.
And her like counselors are married to her husband.
Yeah.
Without
So
her
like
knowledge.
Joseph like sets up the Relief Society.
Okay, there's a word for this in the year 2026. If you know what it is, you know what it is. It starts with an F, ends with a boy. And that's what is that not what it feels like?
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy because Joseph Smith sets up the Relief Society. I can argue about that for a while later about how it's really a men's organization. But he sets up the Relief Society and he tasks them with taking care of the moral purity. And so Emma Smith's like, bet I'm going to get rid of all these people who are saying that you're practicing polygamy. And he's like, wait, hold the phone. I never said like that.
Yeah, relax.
And so the Relief Society becomes a major. We sanctify the early Relief Societies. It's like beautiful organization. I'm like, no, this is Joseph Smith and Emma fighting in public over polygamy. It's if you ever feel bored, go read the minutes of the original Relief Society. Like, they only get one meeting in before they are arguing over whether or not they need to censure sister so-and-so because she was spreading a rumor about Joseph Smith being married to Don Carlos's widow. And like, no joke, this was like the whole minutes of this meeting. They are doing like very little charitable work. They're mostly trying to figure out who's
sleeping with who.
Who's sleeping with who. Like it. When I read them for my thesis, I was getting so distracted. I was like, I need to know the tea. Like, what was happening here?
Well, I feel like, truly, I have thought like, man, you want to go Secret Lives of Mormon Wives? Like, what is it? Like 1835 is like 1840. Like that's where you need to be looking, because like the drama of that, like, the Hulu show, I feel like cannot compare to what was happening.
My gosh. Nauvoo was wild. We don't even know. Like it was the wild, wild west out there. William Clayton is literally writing in his journal about how he asked his mother-in-law if he could sleep in the same bed as both of her daughters because he's married to both of them. Like he's asking for a threesome of his mother-in-law, who is having a nervous breakdown, by the way, and tried to unfortunately unalive herself. Like the drama that is going on at this time period. And it gets even worse in some ways in Winter Quarters. We don't talk a lot about polygamy in Winter Quarters, but this is a big focus of my thesis. And so people might not realize that once they got to Winter Quarters, all of Joseph Smith's plural wives have been divided up between basically Heber C. Kimball and Brigham Young. As so they were married, and now they're married again, to Heber or Brigham for life, but they're sealed to Joseph for eternity, including some of these wives who were already married to someone else, like Zina Huntington. Mm-hmm. And so they are they're coming to Winter Quarters, where they're actually kind of allowed to live in polygamy openly, but at the same time, Brigham Young and the other leaders are not talking about polygamy publicly yet. So the other saints are watching these women basically get like scooped up, moving from like household to household. Like poor Zina, who she's pregnant by her legal husband, but married now to Brigham Young
after being married to
Joseph Smith, and she comes to Winter Quarters and basically leaves her legal husband and becomes part of Brigham Young's camp. You see this happen. It's like this huge, enormous mess that really doesn't get worked out pretty much ever. Like these are the things that I'm talking about for generational trauma. These are the issues that just keep rolling. No one's taking care of them.
Yeah. Wasn't there a woman who was sealed to Joseph Smith as his wife after he had passed? And so she needed a proxy husband to, maybe you're not familiar with this. I heard this somewhere on the internet. So she wants to be sealed to Joseph Smith, or I don't know if she wants to. I can't actually attest to that, but is getting sealed to Joseph Smith, who has died. And so she needs a proxy stand-in, and the proxy stand-in is her legal husband. And so her legal husband like stands in for Joseph Smith. And so it's like his legal wife is like eternally getting married to Joseph Smith. Yeah, like someplace other than him.
This happens multiple times, actually. Like if you look through the Nauvoo endowment and temple records that they have, that they, when they were really quickly trying to like get everyone their endowments, seal them, before they left for the West. Joseph Smith is sealed to a lot of people, like a lot of people. And it continues to happen. Once, they get to Utah, he has continued to seal to people, and so are others. There are prophets who literally on their birthday, as a birthday present to themselves, were sealed to hundreds of women, just random dead women, sealed to them as a birthday present.
Happy birthday, guys. Happy birthday.
Like this is what I'm talking about. This kind of stuff just happened. It was just wild. The stories of the things that happened in Nauvoo, in Winter Quarters, in Utah, there really aren't words for it.
Yeah. What can you tell me? It sounds like, so in your earliest memories, knew relatively a lot about polygamy. Like knew you were a descendant of polygamy, maybe had some discomfort, but like, were probably internalized that to be a Linda problem. Yeah. Can you tell us about maybe that dynamic within yourself kind of like shifting to where it was like, you get what I'm saying?
Yes.
When you began to feel like you had to have a reckoning about things.
For sure. So when I set out to write The Fourth Wife, The Fourth Wife is actually the third book I ever wrote. My first two books were more like fantasy historical fiction, like historical fantasy. And they weren't getting traction. They weren't getting picked up by an agent. And so I was like, for my next book, I really want to dig into something that I personally connect with. I want to dig into my own family history, and I want to write about polygamy. And when I set out to write it, I originally was just going to write a straight historical fiction. And I, being a history person, I was like, no, this is going to be really well researched. I'm going to do my research to make this book happen. And I wanted to talk about even the things that were hard. Mm-hmm. And as I was doing the research, I discovered there was so much more hard things that I had not realized. Mm-hmm. And that is when the book switched to be a horror, because I was like, oh no, this is terrifying. This is a horror. Like this is a real life horror. Mm-hmm. And that is where that process happened. It was in doing the research for this book, even though I felt like I already had a decent understanding and I wasn't going in with any like rose-colored glasses about this subject to begin with, it was still darker than I could have imagined. And that was a huge reckoning for me of having to realize like there was a lot of like, kind of like you said, like with the shelf and like the idea that like we can be like, well, God will work it out in the end. And so I think that idea of like, God will just make it work in the end. And this is just the way it is. And I'm sure it'll be fine. Just like all my primary teachers told me, that had to end. I had to come to the realization of like, no, this doesn't make any sense. And This is just my personal opinion, and other people may disagree, but I personally do not feel that polygamy is inspired by God. And I do really believe it was a creation of Joseph Smith's for various reasons that we could go into if we want. But that was a huge part for me, was just being able to say that out loud, to recognize like, nope, this was a corrupt, bad system. This was a patriarchal, abusive system where no true consent can exist, and women are objectified and mistreated and abused, even by the best of husbands. It's just a system that doesn't work. And for me, I was like, God didn't make that. I felt that in my bones. You know, the Spirit told me, whatever you want to tell, whatever you want to say. And this was a huge part of the start of my deconstruction, and deconstructing basically all of Mormonism started with polygamy, understanding polygamy and realizing like, this is not what I thought it was.
Yeah. I had an experience that I've mentioned here before, when it comes to the race-based policies of the church, where one day I just had this epiphany. You know, that's something that is so uncomfortable.
Oh my God.
Right? Especially when you are really working to hold up the spiritual and institutional authority of the church to try to make that work. It feels so conflicting internally, I think, to most people, because most people are good, and that runs counterintuitive to what they feel like is right. And I just kind of had this epiphany, like you said, like maybe the Spirit or God, I felt it in my bones or whatever. But the thought of, the church was just being racist.
Yep.
And that doesn't sound like something that would be, that thought brought me a lot of healing, because while it's like, I don't want the church I'm a part of to be racist, it made it make sense. And it took the conflict outside of me, where like,
yes.
because like, you know, we mentioned was like maybe you younger with polygamy, like if there was an issue, it was the issue was with you, that you didn't understand or you didn't like it or whatever. Like for me, that felt like, oh no, like this isn't like the reason that I don't like this isn't because there's something wrong with me. The reason I don't like this is because it's wrong, and like a wrong thing was happening. And that kind of brought me some peace in that way. But then also I felt like it brought me peace with my relationship with the church in a way. But it's like when you realize that your parents are people and things make sense. And you can kind of like forgive them for things because you realize that they were just doing the best they could, but they're taken off their pedestal. Mm-hmm. And you don't see them as like the big boss or always right that you saw them once.
There is amazing peace. And I feel like just power in just calling a spade and recognizing the truth. And I feel like once you stop trying to fit everything into a faithful narrative, and you're just willing to just say like, that was racist, or that was sexist, that was wrong, that wasn't from God, it is so freeing.
Yeah.
It is so freeing. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to lose your faith in God or the church or the prophets or however. Like you can, everyone has their own journey and works that out the way they can. But I would just encourage people to say, like, there is great freedom and great peace, and stop trying to hide from the cognitive dissonance and just accept that this is a reality.
Yeah. And I think we have like some good examples of people like Patrick Mason, for example, who's very educated on church history.
Yes.
It's his whole, like literally his one job, and is still like very faithful and believing. And there are other people like him. And like Ben Park said when he was on, like there's no, like on the spectrum of knowledge about church history, there's like no line where if you go beyond it, there is no belief. Like there are people who know more than any of us, right? And who are, and like who feel very connected to the faith and their spirituality and the church. And like it doesn't work out that way for everyone, that's for sure. But but like it does for some. Like it is possible. And I existed for so long in this dichotomy of either you are faithful or you know, or you get knowledge about stuff, right? And like,
yes, that's not the way it works.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, like echoing what Dr. Park said, and that was fabulous episode, by the way. I'm also a member of the Mormon History Association, and the people I am associating with and talking with, and like people I'm emailing for like my thesis and all this stuff, some of them are extremely devout, believing members. And as you said, they're also insanely smart and know all of these things. And so I like when I bring up, some issue, some sticky thing, they're like, oh yeah, that was like that. And this idea that you have to be all one or the other is, I think, really quite silly, and just a way for the church to kind of, like I said, shoot themselves in the foot instead of just embracing the idea that there's more than one way to Mormon, as Sunstone says.
Yeah. I kind of feel like it's a little bit, when it comes to like to grief, I feel like you don't really ever move on from grief. Like you don't ever like just get over like a significant loss, but you can move on with it, right? Like you can't just like drop it off someplace and like never think about it again, but you can move forward even though you have that and even though you carry it with you. And I guess I feel the same way about this. Like it's not like you like learn something and you're like, oh, okay, everything is like good now. That's like not an issue anymore. Like you can have and understand and feel the discomfort of it, but still be able to move forward on like whatever it is, whatever path, the covenant path, an evil devilish path, whatever path you're on.
I see one of the biggest issues surrounding polygamy and this exact topic is the growth of the conspiracy theory that Joseph Smith did not practice polygamy.
Girl.
It's another thing I could talk about for a long time and get very ragey about. But
you
try to keep it professional.
You ragey?
Try to keep it professional, okay? You can read my blogs for the raginess. But there is basically, if you're unfamiliar, there is a group of people building on the internet specifically that believe that Joseph Smith did not practice polygamy and that Brigham Young made it up, and that, Joseph was innocent and maybe even Brigham Young had him killed, like a whole thing about it. But the historical evidence is just not there. It is the general scholarly consensus that Joseph Smith did practice polygamy. We have eyewitness testimony from the women themselves who were polygamous with him. Mm-hmm. And I think that there is such a desire for Joseph Smith to be pure,
to be good,
to be perfect. Because if you recognize that Joseph Smith was imperfect, like true, like there's lip service to that, right? We always say, "Oh, all the prophets are imperfect.
They're not infallible."
But we don't really mean that, right? Unless we're really willing to say Joseph Smith did bad things. He was a predator. He abused his position of power in order to marry women, in order to sleep with children. Like, he straight up did that. Mm-hmm. And I think that the polygamy denial movement is really just so afraid deep in their core of realizing that their prophet is not perfect.
Having that reckoning.
That they are willing to make up this really vast,
complicated
story where everybody's lying and everybody's covering up.
Yeah,
and
no sources is reliable.
Yeah, and this one's late, so therefore it doesn't count, but it counts in this thing. And
I think
I want to say that I have empathy for people who feel that way, for people who just because like we said, it is so scary. It is so scary because if these people have really come to the recognition that polygamy is bad and that polygamy was not a good thing. But instead of being like, hey, this was maybe just not from God and I need to wrestle with those feelings, they're like, well,
how do we make it not real?
How do we make it not real?
Right? Like, no,
right? No. And the polygamy deniers really come after me in my blogs and everything all the time. They are sometimes really mean. So maybe not my favorite, but I have to talk about it. Because I think this is actually one of the biggest stumbling blocks to us healing. It's not just talking about polygamy and being real about polygamy. It's also being real that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy and as this movement builds and as more and more people find that it's just easier to just fall into that camp than deal with the dissonance, again, how are we going to heal this?
Yeah.
How are we going to make sure that the next generation is not being raised with polygamy trauma?
I think one thing that we try to do here is try to be curious in real time about people, especially the people that make us ragey, right?
Right.
And I think, just like my guess is the reason that is happening is because people feel so connected to their Mormon identity and so connected to their Mormon community, which they should. It's a great community, right? But then, and the idea of losing that identity, losing that community is way too scary, but they recognize this dissonance about polygamy being wrong. And
It's really scary.
And so there needs to be a way to feel okay about having the identity, about being in the community, because that identity, that community is something that we all need. I mean, we need community for survival, right? Like that's so like evolutionarily, biologically baked into us to be connected to people. And I think when people really become aware of what the history is about polygamy, and it feels so uncomfortable, it feels not right, I'm going to, psychoanalyze people a little bit, which is not my professional specialty, but here I go. They don't want that dissonance. And so it's, how do I make this right? Yeah, I just make it not real. So I can stay here and be comfortable and say, and put all of the blame on Brigham Young.
And as I said, I do feel for that, because I've been in those spots. I've been in plenty of those spaces where you're like, how do I make this work? And it just hurts so much.
Yeah.
It's just so much easier to opt out.
Who have we in the process thrown under the bus? Right. Like in our trying to protect our own position, our own identity, our own community, our own safety, our own, our own carrying of water for the patriarchy so that they'll like us. Like, who have we thrown under the bus along the way?
I think that's one of the hardest parts of this movement, is that it has really baked in internalized misogyny and patriarchy, because you are prioritizing a man, Joseph Smith, and his purity and his everything over the lives and the bodies of the women who were affected by him, who were the ones who were subjected to this actual abusive system. And that is one of the reasons why I get ragey, because I just feel that that's not the answer. Yeah. But I do understand why people go there. And I try, to like get, help people maybe understand and open up to like maybe the real answer. As you're speaking, I'm just thinking is this kind of comes back to this idea of black and white thinking. The church is really ingrained in us since we were little, this idea that it's black and white, right? Gordon B. Hinckley saying, it's either all true or it's all false. And if we as a church community and also church hierarchy and authority especially would be willing to just open up the gates, stop gatekeeping this idea that there is one way to believe, or like, that, it's so black and white, where I just kind of wish that Mormonism could be so much more open in general. I really wish that Mormonism was more like, I don't know, lack of a better way, like a culture. Like, it's something that we can identify with. We can identify with the religion, but maybe we don't all believe exactly the same thing about it. I know for me, I would feel significantly more comfortable coming back and sitting in a pew if I actually felt like people actually wanted me there and my full opinions, and not just, Linda, shut up. Stop saying those scary things out loud. Like, it would be really cool if we were actually willing to let everybody in.
Yeah, if it was just bigger. Yeah, I mean, it would create like
big tent Mormonism.
Yeah, it would take a whole shift.
Oh, it would be
in a lot of things. What do you think, really quickly, on like the church we have like the gospel topics essays, which are interesting to read from my point of view. And, there are some people, I think kind of the apologetic stance is like, the church is open about this. Look, they have it on their website here. Like they acknowledge all these things. I don't feel like that is quite, it's through a lens, right? It's everything we write is through a lens, right? There's obviously a bias there. But at the same time, I do think that the church is more forthright about polygamy than they were, and probably some other things as well, than they were at one point.
Definitely.
Do you feel like, does that make you feel any sort of good way? Or are you just like frustrated at the limits of it?
I think I feel a lot of mixed feelings because on the one hand, yes, like it is great that we are now publicly acknowledging this, right? It took us until 2012 for the church to publicly
Year
acknowledge.
of our Lord, 2012.
Yeah. Year of our Lord, Taylor Swift, as I always say. But it took so long for us to finally get there. And that is awesome. Like the Joseph Smith Papers Project is amazing. The amount of things that they are just laying out there now. There has been so many improvements. My frustration and my problem with this is that I feel like it's a way for the church to say, look, we're open, we're talking about it. But at the same time, they do not integrate it into their every week church.
Interesting.
So the Joseph Smith Papers Project, for instance, amazing. The amount of information you can learn there, nothing's like blocked. Who's going to go read that? Nerds like me. It's going to be the people who want to know that thing, who are really interested. Very, very few other people everyday members are going to pick it up, are going to look at it. Even the gospel topic essays, they are not that easy to find on the website, first of all. And you have to have a specific reason to go there. What I would love to see in my magical unicorn world of the church would be for them to take the next step, the next brave step, which would be to integrate these things directly into the church correlated materials that are being presented. Because for the vast majority of members of the church, that is the only material they are going to ever come in contact with from the church. I have wonderful family members and friends that I love and adore, but they are very, very adamant that they will not touch a single thing that is not directly from the church because they believe it's anti-Mormon automatically, or it could be a lie. They only want something that's going to be spoon-fed to them from the first presidency. That's fine. That's their choice. But the church is basically trying to say we're open, but they are not actually speaking to the vast majority of their members who are like that, who they have taught since the cradle. Do not go out and seek other sources. Just recently people talking about don't listen to podcasts, right? Like don't listen to these other people.
Yeah.
And
they'll get you.
So I think if anything, the D&C curriculum needs to be completely revamped and rewritten by a historian. I think there are actually plenty of faith-promoting ways that you can talk honestly about all of these things. The problem is that we choose not to do it.
Yeah. And I feel like typically it's because it challenges the authority.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and I really don't like Doctrine and Covenants. This is my confession. I've confessed it on my blog too. You can read it on the Exponent blog. I do not enjoy the Doctrine and Covenants as a book of scripture, even at my most faithful. I think because I always felt that the Doctrine and Covenants should have been my favorite because I was such a history nerd, and I was just starved every time I tried to read it. I mean, first of all, most of it is just bureaucry, right? Yeah. It's just, I'm not really sure how much I care about Thomas B. Marsh going to the Missouri hastily. Great. Most of it is written in the voice of an angry God, an angry, vengeful God that was not the God that I knew, not the God that I was taught everywhere else. It was very, very much Joseph Smith's perception of how he thinks God should have spoken, if thus saith the Lord kind of thing. There's no women in it. And when we approach it as a church, it's all just follow the prophet, follow the prophet, follow the prophet, worship Joseph, follow the prophet, not worship Joseph, but you know what I mean? Like they're very, and they do not actually engage with it. And so honestly, one of the very last weeks I ever went to church was when we were doing Doctrine and Covenants, and we were talking about Vienna Jax and her contribution in she has like a mention. She's like one of the literally 2 women that are mentioned in Doctrine and Covenants. And I think the teacher, in very sweetly doing what she knows she's supposed to do, she's trying to reach out to me, who's kind of becoming less active, less interested, not attending very often. And so she's like, I know you love history and you love church history. Will you present to us who this woman was? And I was like, bet, I'm doing this. And so I wrote an essay because that's how I know how to talk. And so I read like basically a 2-page essay that I had written on her. And it was brutally honest.
Yeah.
And it was talking about how Joseph Smith used this widow's mite for his own benefit, and talking about, you know, kind of like her life in Missouri and Joseph's slowness to really take care of the saints in Missouri at first, and some other issues. And they all kind of smiled and looked at me and they're like, that was beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sister Hamilton. And that was a very, just kind of that final moment of something I already knew was true, but was like, you don't want me here.
Like, yeah, I'm on my own here.
Yeah. You don't want my actual opinions. You don't want to hear the actual, like, history, the word, like the truth. And that was when I was like, I can't do DNC anymore. I'm out. I can't be here. I can't sit here.
Well, you know where we do want your opinion, and you know where you can sit? Right here on Latter-day Bridge Builders. Thank you so much, Linda. I'm so sad that it's already time for us to wrap up. I know we could just talk endlessly, like truly about this. But before we close out, do you want to tell people where we can find you and what you're working on?
Yeah, so I am active on Instagram and TikTok. My username is at Linda Hamilton Writer. You can find me there. On those platforms, I do talk about books and I talk about Mormonism. I do a lot of book reviews and just like talking about, you know, books in general. So if you ever want just like reviews on books and get good suggestions, that's a really good place to find me there. I am a blogger also on Exponent 2 and on my personal Substack. And so those are the places that I get real ragey and not as academic. But you can read my book, The Fourth Wife, which is already out. And I'm really excited to share that next April, so April 2027, my next book comes out. And this will be of great interest to people who like Mormon history. The book is called The Glass Looker. And it is about Sally Chase, the seer woman in 1820s Palmyra, New York, who taught Joseph Smith how to use seer stones.
We love a psychic queen.
So if you would like to read about the absolutely wild magical origins of Mormonism with folk magic and treasure digging, a lot of treasure digging, and Alvin Smith, my boy Alvin Smith. I love writing about Alvin Smith, by the way. If you want to get all of that fun in a really action-packed adventure kind of story, speculative, witchy, little bit of horror, but mostly more like speculative fun, please follow me on my social media to stay tuned because that is going to come up for pre-order in the next few months.
Awesome. That's so fun. It's the first I've heard about it. That's so fun.
I'm so excited to share.
Oh, thank you so much for gracing us. So excited to have you here in town for Sunstone. Woohoo. By the time everyone watches this, Sunstone will be over, but
yeah,
still.
Sunstone's amazing.
It's
so
exciting.
Excited.
Yeah. Thank you everybody for watching or listening. Please like, follow, share, donate if you can. We're still looking for sponsors. And also we have merch, which is in the, pretty sure, yes, definitely the link will be in the description. Okay, take care, everybody. Bye.